Now when I do start filling up the mash tun, you will notice I have this oak stick. It's actually a joe that I made for Aikido that didn't quite make it into being a joe. You can see it's kind of bent. And I got a couple of notches here that I hacked into it, and that's two different levels. One is the 26 liter mark and the other is the 28 liter mark, and that's what I use to know how much water that I have in my kettle. Okay, I've moved the hose over now. The outlet is in my mash tun, and I'm just going to let it fill up, and when we get closer to the mark I will turn the camera back on. Okay, the water level is now over the top of the thermometer, but it is still not quite to the marks. My temperature inside is about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which is way hotter than I need it, so I'm going to have to stop this at some point and add some cold water. I was overestimating. I overestimated the amount of heat that I'd need. I thought the mash tun would be a lot colder than it was given the temperature today. Okay, I mentioned before that my thermometer here has to be calibrated every year, and I haven't done that yet this year, so I'm going to check with my good digital thermometer. It is telling me that I'm right on about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right about where I want to be anyway for this particular mash. And down here, that was 168. If I didn't say 100, I meant 100. This reads 4 low, so it is actually 5 low is what I should write on it for this year. It's not 4 degrees low, it's 5 degrees low. And I'll check it again next time too. Alright, and now we are going to mash in. I have my mash paddle, I have my grain. This isn't the easiest thing to do with one person, but it's not impossible. I will just position myself so you can see what's going on here, I hope. I'm pouring in. Oh, you can't see that. I'm pouring the grain in and giving it a good stir as I'm pouring. I have the bucket resting on the side of the mash tun, so it's not impossible to do. It's just a little difficult. What's really most difficult is doing it so the camera can see. So, just forgive me, I'm going to turn my back to you. Let's see. This might be a little bit better. Okay. I'll just dump it all in there, and I'll worry about the dough balls in a second. You want to keep it stirring well while you're dumping, so to eliminate dough balls. So I'm probably going to have some dough balls in here to deal with, but that's okay because I got my handy dandy dough ball destroyer. So we're just going to stir this. While I'm stirring it, I have to remember where my probe is for the thermometer so that I don't break my thermometer off. But that's pretty easy to do. So I stir it back and forth this way, front and back this way. Away we go. And I see one big mother dough ball there at the moment. I'll just take you over here. And you can see we've got a big massive dough ball right there. So we just smash it up on the side of the keg, or the side of the mash tun, and we'll go fishing for more dough balls. Dough balls usually float to the top, so they are pretty easy to catch. And I didn't get too bad there given the way I had to mash that in. I actually got fewer dough balls than I normally get, I believe, by the looks of it. Well, I just saw one flip to the surface there. There it is, a little one. Alright. Now, the one thing left to check is what is our temperature right now. That's reading 5 low, so it is currently reading 146, which means the actual temperature is about 151 Fahrenheit. 152 Fahrenheit, I would guess, which is right about exactly where I want it to be to convert the starches in the grain into sugar. I'm just going to keep giving this a good stir. I'm going to turn the camera off and give it a better stir. Okay, I just checked the temperature with my accurate thermometer. It's 151 Fahrenheit. That's about what I was looking for. I'll put the lid on and I'll leave it for 90 minutes now. The thing with the temperature is, when you are down around 150 Fahrenheit, the general range is 150 to 160 Fahrenheit. When you're down around 150, you will take a longer time to convert the starches into sugars, but it will convert them into smaller sugars that will be more fermentable by the yeast, so you get a lower finishing gravity and a less body in your beer. If you mash around 160 Fahrenheit, you will be able to do so more quickly, but it will convert the starches into larger sugars that are not quite as fermentable by the yeast, and so what you will get is a lower alcohol beer with more body to it. And for this particular Bavarian wheat beer, I want a lower body, so I'm mashing 151 right now. That's typically where I mash my beers, even if it isn't according to style, because I don't like terribly malty beers, personally. Just a personal thing. Okay, now I'm going to fill my hot liquor tank back up with water. Incidentally, that's what brewers call the hot water. They call it hot liquor. So I fill the hot liquor tank back up, and my controller will bring it back up to temperature. Although the 202 that I had it set at was far too hot, I will probably set it back to about 180 or 182 or something like that. Incidentally, I will need the extra water when it comes to sparge the mash. At the end of the mash, we sparge. And so I'm going to need approximately 50 liters of sparge water to do that. Okay, 2 hours is up, and you can see it held its temperature very well. By the way, I went 2 hours just because I had to pick the boys up at school. It doesn't matter mashing a bit longer in a circumstance like this, so I mashed for about 2 hours, and now I'm going to do the next step, fill up the tun with water, recirculate, and run it off, and I'll explain that as I'm doing it. There's what it looks like after 2 hours. It smells absolutely fantastic. I should do an iodine test and show you how that works, to test to make sure all the starch is converted to sugar, but I'm not going to today. I'll do that on a future batch. Okay, we're filling this up now, filling it up with the water, and what we're going to do is, once it's filled up, I give it a stir, make sure it's stirred really well, and then we're going to circulate. I'll explain that as I'm doing it, and then we're going to run it off into the buckets, which are down here. So I have it filled up with water, and I'm just giving it a good stir to mix it around, loosen it up a bit for the recirculation and the runoff. We'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, now I've moved the quick connect inlet from the pump. It's no longer connected to my hot water tank, my hot liquor tank. It's connected to the outlet of the mash tun, goes into the pump, and it's going to come right back around, and I'm going to pump right back into the mash tun. And I'll explain that in a moment once I get it going. Okay, we have the recirculation going here. I am fortunate. This is my first time doing a 100% wheat beer. Normally I have some barley malt in there, and we talked earlier about the husk from the malt, but I'm using rice hulls and it seems to be working fine. This is flowing just perfectly. I don't have to worry about a stuck mash. So what I'm doing at this point is recirculating. You may recall in the bottom of the mash tun there's a filter that leads to the inside of that spigot there. I'm basically pumping out of the bottom of the mash tun and back into the top, and what this does is it filters through that screen, but also the husk material, the rice hulls in my case, act as a filter bed throughout the whole depth of the mash that filter gunk and so forth out of the mash. They filter a whole lot of the cloudiness out of the mash so that that doesn't end up in your final beer. And I will just recirculate it here for probably about 5 minutes, keep this going, and at the end of the 5 minutes I will just let it fly, open it up and let it drain into the bucket there.